Hello, everybody. I'm happy to be here and present something to you about strategy and execution of strategy. It's a very great passion point of me. I've been talking to Lucas of Cascade over the last year, and we really share the same passion about building a great strategy and put it into execution. So let me tell a bit on how we approach it and how we tend to be successful in translating a strategy into execution. I will share my PDF with you guys so that you have a bit of a flavor of what we are trying to do. So what you see here is basically how we think about, in a very complex world, how do you build a sustainable growth strategy? I think we all can acknowledge nowadays the circumstances we live in are highly complex. The world is moving fast and changing fast. And what I'm doing in PepsiCo is basically leading the innovation arm for the foods division. And what I've learned is that the innovation capability of a small team is really helpful in changing, especially established brands or established companies, into a slightly different and a more successful avenue of growth. So let me tell you a bit how I came to this answer to this question. So first and foremost, I think the most important piece is that you think through the who, the what, and the how of your strategy in parallel. And if you look back in most companies, they start with deep consumer research and understanding the consumer and build their strategy from that angle. I personally believe that that is absolutely a starting point, but that's not the whole story. Think about the iPhone, for example. It's always an example coming up for many speakers. But for me, what it really tells me is that you really need to combine the consumer insight, the technology, and how technology will improve and will develop over time. The legal framework, how you need to make money, about the business model you're planning to design. That all needs to interact, right? So, for example, the iPhone, if you would ask a consumer back in 2005, do you need a digital device where you can read all the entertainment and do a lot of different stuff? They will probably come up with a completely different answer than what Apple has done based on the narrative of how tech would evolve and how tech would influence consumer demand. So that is an example of how tech and consumer demand are actually influencing each other, right? And the third lens is basically thinking through, how do I make this sustainable over time? How do I make sure that I have a business model where I can make the right money, the right amount of money to stay afloat and to stay successful? So that is where the who, what, and how really needs to come together and is influencing each other to be successful over time. Let me give you, next to the iPhone, another great example, which is very, very close to my heart. That is the Nike Air Jordan case. And I'm not sure if you have seen the movie recently, but it reminded me of that great case on how they brought these three lenses of the how and the what together into a holistic and successful model. It started by the acknowledgement that the whole market was at that time very functionally driven, right? Very all about basketball and the functionality of a shoe in that game. Nike was the first to realize, if we add the emotional benefits of lifestyle into that, and personality, we create a completely different revenue stream and a completely different opportunity to piggyback from the basketball game. And with Michael Jordan, they had the right, let's say, icon to help them to achieve that. So they really thought about not only the functionality of the shoe, but how do we bring this personality and how do we bring this lifestyle? They actually brought it into the development of the shoe. They thought about it, how do we make the business model out of that, right? So it is much more a premium price point you can ask for such shoes because there's an emotional connection to it. And that drives a completely different business model than what we have seen in the past in the shoe industry. So that for me is another probably less known great example of how you need to bring those three lenses together into a successful strategy, and how they need to work not only together but also in parallel. Personally, what I think is important is also not only to understand how these three lenses are working together to build this strategy, but how do you plot this in time? How do you define what your long-term success really is? And how eventually do you get there with applying the three lenses? And what I've learned in this innovation practice I'm leading here at PepsiCo is the concept of future casting and backcasting. And future casting, backcasting is a super powerful tool to bring some order towards the future. A future cast is basically your vision of how the three lenses might evolve over time and how they come together, right? Think about the future of zero-based transmission, or zero-based output for what Tesla is doing in terms of the energy transformation in transportation. That is a clear vision where they basically say a couple of macro trends and consumer needs are really coming together into this vision of having a zero-based transportation model into the future. That is a future cast, right? And then the question is, how do you get there? How do you get there? How do you really look at your company, where your company is today? Where are the capabilities of the companies, and what are the necessary steps over the three lenses to come to that end vision in a way that you can really be successful, right? And that's very different than not doing the future cast and just looking back at the data of the past and build your strategy on looking back and leveraging the data of the past, which most of the time might give you a slightly successful strategy in the short term, but it's not really leapfrogging competition as what you potentially can do with future casting and backcasting. Now, another way in terms of looking at that model of three lenses and future and backcasting is also to think through how do you need to design your organization. What is important for even considering to start on this journey. I learned that basically start with a very small team, which I used to say needs to be able to share a pizza, because that is actually scientifically proven that with 7 people you work the best on complicated tasks. Maximum 7 people, I have to say. And what I think again is important then, that 7 people read to jointly envision that future, bring their key expertise to the table and do that future casting on what success might look like in the future. And then you or the people leading the innovation or the strategy department are much more in the role of servant leadership, right? How do you help those people, this team of 7 people, to be successful, right? If you want to change a big organization, that you have a lot of barriers to come across, and that is exactly what the leader needs to step in and to say, okay guys, I give you the room to maneuver and to be successful towards the future, and I'm here to help you remove the barriers so that you guys can be successful in building that strategy we ask you to do. So that is something which I think almost often forgotten, because we are looking at the shiny objects of the methodology or the theory, but we are not really looking at how do we build a really coherent team and help the team to be successful in especially in bigger organizations with established interests. So leadership is important for me, and the way of leading is something that makes or breaks a successful strategy development process, right? And I already alluded to the fact of the autonomy to learn of that team of 7. that is something which is a mind shift change, I guess, for a lot of the leaders, to leave that to that group of experts, but have a model and process in place to measure success and help that team to be successful. An analogy I'm often using is the venture capitalist model. Think about how a venture capitalist is investing in a startup. They give certain rounds, round A, B, C, D. For every round, you step up the investment because there are more proof points that the strategy is working. That logic, looking at your team of 7 being the startup, and you being the venture capitalist as the leader of that team, is a way to balance them and give them the freedom to operate, do what is right for the company, while you are measuring the success in a more objective way as a venture capitalist against certain KPIs. That's a way which might be helpful for you guys to think through in a different way how teamwork could be successful. Now, the last slide I have is I talked a lot about intent and about other companies on and all the famous examples on Tesla and iPhone and the Air Jordan were part of it. And apologies of making that a bit dull in terms of using the same examples you probably heard multiple times, and even maybe today. But I can testify to the fact that what I just told you, if you think that through and you start to apply that, you can be successful in very different industries. And in my case, that is the food industry, and we have applied everything I said, especially in China and in the UK, in a very difficult COVID environment. And we could come to, at the output of this process in those 2 markets, we came to very successful new product portfolios, which are actually now still growing over the last 2 years. And that's what I'm not only proud of, that we as a team together achieved, but probably even more prouder on the fact on how we achieved it with applying the model I was just presenting to you guys. So that was what I had in mind to share with you. And I think Danielle is now joining for the Q&A session. So happy to answer your questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Koen. And once again, I have a million questions that I personally would love to ask you, but we'll keep it succinct here and try and get through as many as we have with the time that we have. So Koen, I would love to kick things off around the concept that you mentioned of creating this team of experts and choosing the people to fill the roles in that team. What do you think the right balance of potential versus skill in those people should be? And how does seniority level or maturity come into play?
That's a great question. So I think skills, capability, and seniority are all important KPIs or selection criteria on how you want to look at building your team. But I think mindset, a cultural mindset, is the overarching KPI you cannot really compromise, right? So having the mindset to position yourself into the future, working back from the future, and even if you have never done that before, but you have demonstrated that you as a person like to do that there's already enough proof points for me to make a gamble and to say, come on, join my team. And contribute, right? That is, I think that is probably more important than the skill set and the capability is the mindset.
Amazing. That's a great answer. And I think kind of building on that in terms of thinking of the future state and working your way back, we had a great question from Christy here, which I'm going to show now. How do you measure sustainable growth? And does this change depending on which brand you're working on? What are those key indicators?
Yeah, no, I love this question. And I think we all have a tendency to really jump to financial KPIs, which is definitely an important way of measuring your success. But especially in the business I am, it's not only the financial KPIs, it's also the brand KPIs. So what you do in terms of future growth needs to strengthen your brand positioning, right? So whatever the desired brand positioning is, that is I think why it always needs to be more than financials, and looking at the brand positioning. And thirdly, in the context we live in today, I almost feel that we have an obligation to drive sustainability from the start, right? So when we talk about new avenues of growth, let's make sure and try to do our best to make them sustainable, right? That goes beyond financials and brand, but there's almost a moral obligation to try to do that at least.
Absolutely. And I think coming into just our final question here, since we are up on time, I would love your thoughts on this great question from Rena. How does PepsiCo foster a culture of innovation within the organization to continually develop and implement sustainable practices? So I'd love to hear what you think of this question in regards to what you just said of, future proofing the brand and building the brand. How do you foster that across the organization?
Yeah, it is greatly important that you start a culture from the top and from the bottom. And what I mean by that is that we in PepsiCo, we basically have clearly announced to the street what we call PepsiCo Plus, right? Which are our long-term sustainability KPIs for how we want to position the company. That is carried out by the CEO, and he's the major voice to the broader community. And the bottom up means all the individual employees and stakeholders of PepsiCo have a role to play. So I'm looking at my own objectives. I don't have only financial objectives in my yearly development plan or PD, personal development plan, or however you want to call it. I also have important KPIs on sustainability and how we have a broader impact to society. So I think it is that. So how do you start at the top, but how do you translate this into the bottom, that people really put money where their mouth is?
Amazing. I love how all of our sessions and key bringing kind of these consistent themes across with sustainability and growth. Thank you so much, Koen. We really appreciate your time today and this fantastic keynotes. In just a couple of seconds, we'll be jumping into our final session of the day, wrapping things up. So we will see you all in just a few moments. But thanks again, Koen, so much.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.